The off-road racing fraternity makes an annual pilgrimage to KwaZulu-Natal for one of the toughest and best supported events on the ABSA Off-Road Championship calendar. The ABSA Off-Road Championship features 8 events in South Africa and neighbouring territories, and KZN's only national championship race is based in a rich farming and forestry area not far from Pietermaritzburg.
The Beaumont Eston Farmers Club is home to the aptly named Sugarbelt 400, round 3 of this year's ABSA Championship. Organised by the Eston and Middelhover Farmers Association and the Natal Off-Road Motor Club, the race was voted the event of the year in 2009, and this time around had a new look about it, with Atlas Copco joining Donaldson Filtration Systems, Ford and Toyota as partners with ABSA in a championship that is a jewel in South Africa's motorsport crown.
Glorious autumn weather with not a cloud in the sky greeted teams as they arrived at the Beaumont Eston Farmers Club, where the pit area was the usual hive of pre-race activity. Teams were setting out their stalls for what promised to be a busy weekend, with technical crews going through the last-minute preparations for the Donaldson Prologue that would determine race start positions.
The Sugarbelt 400 was left without a sponsor when Nissan withdrew from South African motorsport at the end of 2009. Atlas Copco has supported one of the strongest privateer teams in the ABSA Championship and took its involvement in South African off-road racing to a new level by stepping into the breach to sponsor the Sugarbelt 400.
Atlas Copco is a broad-based engineering group. We bring world-leading products to market in 3 principal areas. The first is our Atlas Copco compressors and generators. The second is the mining equipment for underground and surface mining, road construction, construction tools. And thirdly, the Atlas Copco business area of power tools and assembly systems, which has a specific link, of course, to the motor vehicle industry.
As a company, Atlas Copco has had a lengthy association with South African off-road racing, and last year made history when Gary Berthold and Andre Vermeulen became the first privateer crew to win a national event overall.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. It started about 7 or 8 years ago with one of our overseas visiting executives who had a personal interest in motorsport, visiting a customer in South Africa and being asked whether we would be interested as Atlas Copco to support off-road racing in South Africa. So that's where it started. 3 years ago when I joined the company here, I took on this mantle, if you like, and we've explored it, we've developed it a little bit further. We've looked very carefully at our involvement to make sure that we're getting value out of it. And I think the value comes from a number of places. I think first and foremost, very importantly, it puts the Atlas Copco brand there for the whole group, all our business areas. Secondly, I think it's a sport in South Africa that has a very wide following, as is seen when you attend the events and the media coverage and so on. For our customers, they very much enjoy coming, so we try to get as many customers along to each event as it moves around the circuit, and I think that works very well. And I think there's also a very strong technology link between Atlas Copco's ethos of innovation, bringing good solutions to our customers in the marketplace with our products, and of course the technology that goes into motor vehicle design and assembly and so on. So I think there's a very strong link there as well.
Former SA champions Neil Woolridge and Kenny Skolthammer are the only crew to have won an ABSA event in a diesel-powered car, and were looking for back-to-back wins in a race notorious for a high rate of attrition.
I think there is a variety, but I think it wears you down, both mentally and car-wise. It's very, very demanding. It's very narrow. There's lots of drop-offs. There's sugar cane to slip off onto. There's tree stumps all over the place, rocks and boulders waiting to catch you out on the sides of the very narrow roads, and mainly running along cane roads and timber tracks. So it's very, very demanding. Total concentration all the time.
The debut of another diesel-powered car, a BMW X3 running in Retirement Fund Solutions colours, raised eyebrows and saw another manufacturer represented in what is probably the most competitive off-road series in the world.
We want to do something different. I think we achieved that. We'll see what the car will do today. We didn't have much testing time, so it's all a new game for us.
A South African off-road legend lives just up the road from Eston, with Alfie Cox making a rare ABSA Championship appearance in a PS Laser Nissan Navara that was built specifically for the Dakar Rally.
I'm a little bit rusty. I suppose I haven't ridden since the Dakar. It'll take me a little bit time to get in, but you know, I've raced motorcycles here at Sugarbelt, cars here. I've had good events, and it's my hometown, so I'm not really feeling the pressure, but we want to do well. I mean, we've got a lot of fans coming out here, a lot of friends, and that's what it's all about.
Going into the Atlas Copco Sugarbelt 400, former champions Hannes Grobler and Henny ter Steege led the production vehicle category from Adenko 400 winners Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst, and Toyota Dealer 400 winners Neil Woolridge and Kenny Scholthammer.
The top 5 seeded drivers draw start positions for the Donaldson Prologue to determine grid positions for the race. All the drivers hope to avoid the dreaded number 1 slot on the road, where acting as pathfinders is a major disadvantage. Championship leader Hannes Grobler and Anthony Taylor were all smiles after drawing the number 3 and number 2 slots. And ironically, it was Atlas Copco star Gary Bertholdt who found himself at the head of the field.
The Atlas Copco Sugarbelt 400 was run over east and west course loops, with a 100-kilometre east loop also doubling up as the Donaldson Prologue. This section saw crews headed south toward Ismont before doubling back to Eston via Ngquzuka, and was made up mainly of sugarcane fields, with conditions expected to be dry and rather dusty.
The Donaldson Prologue on the Atlas Copco Sugarbelt 400 is a little like qualifying at the Monaco Formula 1 Grand Prix. Monaco is a tight and twisty street circuit where overtaking is impossible and pole position is first prize. The Sugarbelt 400 is a tight and twisty off-road race, and the dust and narrow tracks make overtaking more than a little difficult. As at Monaco, being first on the road is a major advantage, and some ding-dong battles were expected in what is essentially a time trial with high stakes. The Atlas Copco Toyota Hilux of Gary Bertholdt and Andre Vermeulen was first car away, followed by the Team Castrol Toyota Hilux of Anthony Taylor and Robin Houghton, and the RFS Toyota Hilux of championship leaders Hannes Grobler and Henny ter Steege.
Rolling hills are easy on the eye, but for off-road racing crews, there's no time to sit back and enjoy the scenery. Out on the course, Adenko 400 winners Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst had the bit between their teeth and were credited with the fastest time in the RFS Toyota Hilux. Only 1 second behind Visser and Badenhorst, who's run the Comrades Marathon 8 times, were Anthony Taylor and Robin Houghton in the first of the factory Team Castrol Toyota Hilux entries. The pair led this event last year until they broke down 80 kilometers from the finish, and they were hoping for better luck this time round.
The second Team Castrol Toyota Hilux in the hands of reigning South African drivers champion Duncan Force and Robbie Howie was only 9 seconds behind teammates Taylor and Houghton. Only 10 seconds separated the first 3 cars, with Alfie Cox and Jürgen Schroeder a further 10 seconds behind in the PS Laser Nissan Navara. Race cam footage from the Cox-Schroeder Navara shows just how difficult it was to pass unless you had the full cooperation of the crew ahead of you. Fortunately for the Nissan crew, George Barkhuizen and David van Wyk politely moved over and allowed them to go on their merry way.
A microlight aircraft offers a bird's-eye view of proceedings, while down on terra firma, Neil Woolridge and Kenny Scholthammer made sure of 5th place in the factory Ford Racing Ranger TDCI, with the pair finishing 16 seconds ahead of the Atlas Copco Toyota Hilux of Gary Bertholdt and Andre Vermeulen. A faulty odometer hampered Bertholdt and Vermeulen, with the Atlas Copco car finishing 1 minute and 47 seconds behind the leaders. Next up was the Red Star Raceway Toyota Hilux in the hands of former Eastern Transvaal rugby star Ramon Besaidnout and wife Marette, with the Regent Racing Nissan Navara of brothers-in-law Mike Whitehouse and Matthew Carlson a further 45 seconds adrift.
Whitehouse and Carlson are currently the most consistent crew in the ABSA Championship and are involved in a little friendly family rivalry with brother-in-law Terence Marsh, who this season has teamed up with multiple South African champion Bux Carolyn in a second of the ex-factory Nissan Navaras, now in Regent Racing colours. Marsh is a former professional cricketer, and going into the Sugarbelt was 2-0 down on Whitehouse and Carlson.
It was a difficult prologue for Christian de Plooy and Henk Janse van Vieren in the RFS Toyota Hilux. Janse van Vieren suffered a bout of motion sickness, and the pair also lost time to lend a hand when George Barkhuizen and David van Wyk rolled the AIM Toyota Hilux. Championship leaders Hannes Grobler and Henny ter Steege were also in trouble and battled to change a wheel after a puncture. That cost them 12 minutes and confined them to a midfield start. But there was better news for the RFS BMW, with Chris de Plooy Sr. and Tinus Janse van Rensburg having a clean run in the new car.
With little or no testing prior to the race, it was an encouraging start for the new car, with the crew using the race as a shakedown exercise for the diesel-powered BMW. With off-road enthusiasts keeping close tabs on the BMW, it was a case of so far, so good.
It was also a case of so far so good for Graham Leith and Mike Lawrenson, who were having their first outing of the season in the Transcore Ford Ranger. They were a little ring rusty, but enjoying themselves in the X-Factory car. Also back in action were Picky Labuskaghni and Rikus Erasmus, who set the pace in Class E in the 4x4 Mega World Toyota Hilux. Labuskaghni and Erasmus came in ahead of the Toyota Dealer 400 winners, Lance Woolridge, the teenage son of Neil Woolridge, and the experienced Ward Huxtable in the Ford Racing Ranger.
The third fastest time in Class E went to rookies Johan de Lange and Gert Usch, and there was the growing prospect of an intriguing battle developing in the race between Ford, Nissan and Toyota entries. On the Class D front, reigning champions Dierwald van Breda and Johan de Toy were out on their own, with the new Northam Toyota Hilux having its first outing, with the category this season running under new regulations.
With the Donaldson prologue done and dusted, it was time for post-mortems, while technical crews worked to restore cars to full health for the race itself. For Anthony Taylor, the prologue was a case of an opportunity missed to start first on the road.
My biggest problem was I couldn't see quite through all the dust that was ahead of me, because about 40 k's from the end I had about 30 seconds on Chris Visser, and then I got stuck behind Gary Berthold in his dust. So that's really what cost me my time, because from there on I just sort of had to go at a reasonable pace, sort of his pace, and that's what allowed Chris to catch up to us. But yeah, it's still a good result. I think there's going to be quite a lot of pressure in the morning. On Chris's side, not so much from, I'm going to be applying the pressure. So yeah, let's hope we can get past fairly early and bring it home with a nice victory.
Alfie Cox was in a cheerful mood, but for Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst, there was plenty of time for thinking about the severe pressure they would come under at the start of the race. A satisfied Visser knew better than anyone the value of starting first on the road.
Yeah, I must say it's, we really try to be in front, try to push it today to be in front tomorrow, because I think the dust is going to be very horrible tomorrow.
History was made on the Toyota Dealer 400 when Johan van Staden and James Rousseau became the first Class B crew to win an ABSA national race overall. It was a win that took Pretoria-based van Staden and Rousseau right to the top of the championship standings, and it also earned them a place in the Atlas Copco team.
That's a tough one. Last year we came second. Not an easy one. It's very slippery, very fast, and then 3 loops put you on a sort of idea that you almost finished, but there's another loop to go when you come back for the second time. So, but it's a tough event.
Teams in the ABSA Championship drop one score at the end of the season. The system places an added burden on those who pick up an early non-finish, with reigning champions Evan Hutchison and Achim Bergman facing that scenario.
Unfortunately, we have got a bit of pressure, you know. After the last event of having, I would call it a spectacular outing. You know, we had a beautiful time trial, got into the lead, leading overall with a nice strong gap and an alternator failure, which we've obviously worked tirelessly to try and sort out, and we hope we have. But no, I wouldn't say too much pressure. It's still beginning of the season, it's not the end of the world. We Sugarbelt traditionally have always done very well. Yeah, I enjoy this area. So yeah, no, not too much pressure.
A confident approach from the Motorrad team, but Hutchison has the track record to back up that kind of talk, and belief in your own ability is a priceless asset for any sportsman.
For the first time in the history of the ABSA Off-Road Championship, a Class P crew led the overall standings, with Johan van Staden and James Rousseau holding a 14-point advantage over Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Rousseau.
As is the case in the production vehicle category, the top 5 seeds in the special vehicles also draw for start positions on the Donaldson Prologue. Once again, first on the road is to be avoided at all costs, but for the second time in 2 races, Limpopo-based Naheem Wasaji found himself drawing the short end of the stick.
There was a little sentiment involved in the weekend for Naheem Wasaji. He was having his first outing in the Maxxis Tyre Rack Porter, which at one stage was owned by his uncle Sam Musaji. Behind Musaji and Rehan Bodhanya, the prologue was to be a short-lived affair for both Colin Matthews and Alan Smith in the Century Racing Bat and the father and son team of Nick and Ryan Harper in the Atlas Copco car.
Matthews and Smith and the Harpers were early casualties, with another father and son crew, Cully and Quinton Sulwat, finding form after a shaky start to the season to set the fastest time among the special vehicles. The Sulwats were South African champions in 2008, but since then have battled to find consistency. The pair sat out the latter part of the last season, with the younger Sulwat involved in university exams, and the Palabora-based team were also missing the opening event of the season. The Sulwats managed to put 33 seconds between them and the former South African champion Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Rousseau in the Total Motorsport Porter. Third fastest were reigning champions Evan Hutchison and Achim Bergman in the Motorite Bat, who were just over a minute adrift of Variawa and Rousseau, who won the opening event of the year in the Western Cape. Fourth fastest were Herman and Vichard Sulwat in the Sulwat Racing CVR, with the top 5 rounded out by the local crew Lance Three and Richard Horner in the LT Earthmovers Bat, who took full advantage of the local knowledge to upstage a string of crews who regularly compete at national level.
Some local youngsters got caught up in the spirit of the event, with another KZN crew in Clint Gibson and Gary Campbell setting the 6th fastest time in the Gibson Racing SVR. They were followed by the first of the Class P contingent, with overall championship leaders Johan van Staden and James Rousseau giving new sponsors Atlas Copco a win first time out. Behind the Pretoria-based crew, only 2 seconds separated Cape Town brothers Johan and Dion Besadenhout in the Adenco Bat, who were having their first outing since the Adenco 400 in the Western Cape, and Mark Corbett and Rudy Balzer in the Century Racing CR3. Next up was veteran Bodo Bertholdt and Philip Herselman, who works for event sponsors Atlas Copco, and behind them were the leading Class B crew, with Simon Beckett and Steve Harris coming in ahead of local team Marcus Taylor and Derek Keith.
Back at Race HQ, Karl-Heinz Sulwat was full of smiles after a workmanlike performance out on the road.
Yeah, but we're happy. We're glad to be here. We had a good, clean run. Nothing fancy. We didn't get lost. Navigator was excellent. So we're glad to be here, yeah.
Over in the Total Motorsport camp, Shamir Variawa was already mulling over tactical options for the race.
The car went fine, no problems. I think tomorrow we'll just try and keep our pace and try and follow Cully, who's in front of us, and see what happens. And after the last loop, we'll try and make a plan to push time or gain position.
With the race scheduled to get underway at 8 a.m, it was an early start for teams as they prepared for what was going to be a tough day at the office. Only 1 second separated the first 2 cars in the production vehicle category, and that set the scene for an explosive start to the day.
It's tight. No, it's going to be exciting. You know, it's a bit damp this morning, so which makes it a little bit tricky. For the first hour or two, there's not too much wind, so yeah, it's going to be exciting.
It was going to be a tough day for production vehicle championship leaders Hannes Grobler and Henny Terstegen. A disappointing prologue left them 12 minutes behind the leaders.
Yesterday wasn't our best day. We had a puncture and then we bent the rim on the inside and we didn't realize it immediately and the tyre got stuck. The bent piece was behind the caliper and we were struggling to get the tyre off, but eventually we lost about 8-9 minutes in that process. But oh well, today's a long day and we'll see how it goes today.
With easy access from Gauteng, Durban and Pietermaritzburg, the Atlas Copco Sugarbelt always draws big crowds at the start and at viewing points along the route. Off-road racing is a family-orientated sport and relatives, friends and enthusiasts mingle with competitors at the start, and tension starts to mount as the minutes tick by. Competitors have their own methods when it comes to dealing with pre-race nerves, and one thing is for certain, Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst would be under pressure from the moment the flag dropped to start the race.
The 2 lead cars were hardly out of sight when Duncan Voss and Rob Howie set off in hot pursuit, with Alfie Cox and Jürgen Schroeder only seconds behind the Team Castrol Toyota crew.
The first 40 kilometers of the east loop of the course took crews through the Eastern and Mid-Ilovo areas, and conditions were going to be tight and dusty.
It was a given fact that Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst would immediately come under heavy attack from Anthony Taylor and Robin Houghton in the Team Castrol Toyota Hilux. The pressure was on, and the opening stages of the race were crucial for Visser and Badenhorst, with a magnificent battle developing between the two teams. Dramatic race cam footage from the Castrol Toyota captures the intensity of the battle.
The race cam footage also emphasizes just how difficult it was to overtake with all the high cards held by the crew in the lead. Behind the Visser, Badenhorst and Taylor Houghton battle, Duncan Voss and Rob Howie were steaming along in the second Castrol Toyota Hilux, with Alfie Cox and Jürgen Schroeder in hot pursuit in the PS Laser Nissan Navara. The Navara was especially built for this year's Dakar Rally by the Hall Speed operation run by Glenn Hall, who's now in charge of the Castrol Toyota off-road and rally teams. It was Cox's first competitive outing since the Dakar Rally, with the multiple SA bike and car champion admitting to being just a little ring rusty.
There was no shortage of vantage points from which to catch the action, and there was plenty of that. Karl-Heinz Silwaltz and son Quinton started the day with a 33-second advantage in the special vehicle category, and had Adenko 400 winners Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Russo trying to close them down. Silwaltz Sr. first won the South African Championship as a co-driver to brother Herman in the mid-90s, with the brothers then taking a lengthy sabbatical from racing. They returned more than a decade later, with Karl-Heinz again winning the championship, this time with son Quinton in 2008. And taking the family aspect a step further, Herman is now partnered by his son Richard.
Former SA champion Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Rousseau are flyers. There was never any doubt the Total Motorsport crew were going to take up the chase, although starting sixth on the road behind the Silwaltz meant that they would run into the pockets of dust. Behind the Total Porter, former champions Neil Woolridge and Kenny Schulthammer were looking to make it two in a row in the diesel-powered Ford Racing Ranger TDCi after their historic win on the Toyota Dealer 400. Woolridge lives in Maritzburg and on the Sugarbelt faces a little extra pressure and carries high expectations from family, friends and business associates. Woolridge and Schulthammer have been together in the Ford Racing Factory team for nearly a decade and share a unique record, with both having won the legendary Roof of Africa on 2 and 4 wheels.
There were also high expectations where Gary Berthold and Andre Vermeulen were concerned, but the event was about to turn into something of a nightmare for the Atlas Copco crew. Reigning special vehicle champions Evan Hutchison and Achim Bergman were looking comfortable in the motorbike bat with a good points haul top of their agenda. Behind them, Ramon and Moret Besadenhout had also made a strong start to the race and were being chased by Mike Whitehouse and Matthew Carlson, who were looking to extend an already impressive reliability record in the ex-factory Nissan Navara, now being campaigned by the Regent Racing team. They were followed by KZN crew Lance Trathui and Robert Horner, who looked impressive on the Donaldson prologue. One KZN crew was being followed by another local team, with Clint Gibson and Gary Campbell also making a solid start in the Gibson Racing SVR, with a little train of cars completed by Naim Musaji and Rehan Badania in the Maxxis Tyrak Porter.
Going off the beaten track to watch off-road racing is one of life's little pleasures, and the action in Class B was hotting up. Special Vehicle Championship leaders Johan van Staden and James Rousseau were still out in front in the Atlas Copco bat, but Mark Corbett and Rudy Balzar moved into second when they flew past Cape-based Johan and Dion Besaidnout in the Adenko bat. Tagging along behind the Class P trio, Christian de Plooy and Henk Janse van Vuren were also going well, with the members of the RFS team monitoring their progress. There was also good work being done from another RFS team, with Production Vehicle Championship leaders Hannes Grobler and Henny Terstegen starting to pick their way past slower cars. A poor prologue put paid to their victory hopes, but there were valuable points to be salvaged, with the pair not taking any prisoners.
Next in line for Grobler and Terstegen were Gavin and Darren Gray in one of the older bats still in service. With a large RFS Toyota Hilux looming up behind them, the Greys did the sensible thing and moved out of the way at the first opportunity. Discretion is the better part of valor. With Grobler and Terstegen on a roll, we also got a glimpse of Herman and Richard Silwart's rolled SVR. Although Sugarbelt started 12 minutes behind prologue winners Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst, they now had their sights set on a top 5 finish.
The abulant Hannes Sugarbelt is one of motorsport's nice guys and has what can be called a cult following during 33 years of peddling various Nissan products in the National Off-Road and Rally Championships. Nissan's withdrawal from motorsport forced Sugarbelt into switching allegiance to the RFS Toyota team, where he's proving to be as competitive as ever. With Sugarbelt and Tersteger disappearing into the distance, Gavin and Darren Gray could now concentrate on their personal little duel with Daniel Brooks and Paul Gonlag in another of the older bats. The two KZN crews were running just ahead of Simon Beckett and Steve Harris, who were in early control of Class B proceedings in their Century Racing bat.
The Transcorp Ford Ranger in the hands of Graham Leith and Mike Lawrenson was going along steadily enough, with the crew making their first appearance of the season. They were being chased by Chris de Plooy and Tinus Janse van Rensburg in the diesel-powered RFS BMW, which had so far made a highly satisfactory debut. Swaziland crew John Thompson and Clinton McNamara were also having a good outing in the Zarko, running in Class P, and had moved ahead of local crew Marcus Taylor and Derek Keith, who were second in Class B. A little further back, Picky Labuskaghni and Rikus Erasmus had taken early control of Class E in the 4x4 Megawool Toyota Hilux. The pair lost out on last year's Class E title by a single point and are looking to set the record straight this time round.
The final Eastern Loop would take crews back to the designated service park at the Beaumont Eston Farmers Club and then move straight into the challenging West Loop.
At the front of the production vehicle field, Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst had earned a little breathing space in the RFS Visser Transport Toyota Hilux. A combination of tenacity and a dust problem for those doing the chasing had worked in favour of the Yerdenko 400 winners. Still hot on the heels of the leaders were Anthony Taylor and Robin Houghton, who were pushing hard in the first of the two factory Team Castrol Toyota Hilux entries. Taylor and Houghton led last year's Sugarbelt 400 until sidelined by a mechanical problem 80 kilometres from the end, and it appeared that bad luck was again just around the corner.
With the end of the first loop in sight, it all went rather pear-shaped for Taylor and Houghton. The Castrol Toyota Hilux lost all ability to brake when a pipe snapped.
The incident underlined just how quickly fortunes can change in off-road racing, and the unfortunate Castrol Toyota crew had no option but to head for the pits for running repairs. It was to cost them 5 minutes and effectively ended their victory challenge. The spotlight now shifted to Duncan Voss and Rob Howie in the second Castrol Toyota Hilux, with the pair a minute and 40 seconds down on Visser and Badenhorst. Next up were Alfie Cox and Jürgen Schroeder, who were having a solid run in the PS Laser Nissan Navara. In a long and distinguished career on 2 and 4 wheels, Cox has won more South African titles than any other competitor and holds the distinction of winning ABSA off-road championships in both the special vehicle and production vehicle categories.
Matters were also unchanged at the head of the special vehicle field, with Cully and Quinton Sulwalt still out in front in the Sulwalt Racing bat. They had 40 seconds in hand over Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Rousseau, who were perfectly placed to take advantage of any errors from the Sulwalts. Variawa and Rousseau were being chased by Neil Woolridge and Kenny Shorthammer, who were running 5th in the production vehicle category in the factory Ford Racing Ranger. Woolridge also had both his teenage sons competing in the race. Lance Woolridge was racing in Class E, and younger brother Gareth was out in the entry-level cricket category in the KZN Regional Championship race run in conjunction with the Sugarbelt 400.
There were no fireworks from reigning South African champions Evan Hutchison and Achim Bergman, who were holding down a steady if unspectacular third place in the motor-white bat. Behind them, a cameo performance was developing between Ramon and Marek Besadenhout in the Red Star Raceway Toyota Hilux and the Regent Racing Nissan Navara of Mike Whitehouse and Matthew Carlson. The Nissan pair are currently the most consistent crew in off-road racing, with Whitehouse looking for his 27th successive finish in both the special vehicle and production vehicle categories, while Carlson was looking for his 23rd successive finish. The pair were also 2-0 up in some friendly rivalry with brother-in-law Terence Marsh in the second Regent Racing Navara.
Local crew Lance Three and Robert Horner in the LT Earthmovers bat were still making good progress, although local knowledge is not the huge advantage it's made out to be. Three and Horner were running around 4.5 minutes behind the leaders and were fourth among the special vehicles. Another local pair, Clint Gibson and Gary Campbell, were around 50 seconds behind Three and Horner, and hot on their heels, Hannes Sugarbelt and Henny Terstegen, who were making up ground at a rather rapid rate of knots.
Further progress for Grobler and Terstegen was to be temporarily halted when they came across an obstruction or two. The Maxis tyre rack porter of Nai Musiji and Rehan Bodania was horsed to combat and blocking the track. Stacked up behind the porter were Christian Deploy and Henk Janse van Vieren and the Besadenhout brothers in the Adenko bat.
It's in situations like these that a cool head and vast experience are worth their weight in gold. With Henny Terstegen orchestrating some musical chairs, Grobler found a way around the Besadenhouts and the Deploy Janse van Vieren RFS Toyota and rejoined the route with an open road right ahead.
Grobler and Terstegen then picked up another place when they went past Class P leaders Mark Corbett and Rudy Balzer in the Century Racing CR3. Corbett and Balzer took over the Class P lead when Johan van Staden and James Rousseau fell by the wayside and were soon being chased again by Deploy and Janse van Vieren and the Besadenhout brothers, who had managed to find their way past the stranded Musiji and Bodania.
The Century Racing bat in the hands of Simon Beckett and Steve Harris was running at the front of Class B, with a pair coming under pressure from the Transcorp Ford Ranger of Graham Leith and Micaiah Lawrenson, who was still running strongly. Also going well was Swaziland crew John Thompson and Clinton McNamara in the Zarko, as well as Marcus Taylor with Derek Keith, who was second in Class B in their JRE.
A little further back, Class E was still being dominated by Pikkie Lambeskagni and Rikus Erasmus in the 4x4 Mega World Toyota Hilux. On the side of the road, members of Richard Schilling's service crew were waiting for him and Chris Davies to put in an appearance, with the pair starting at the back of the field. The Region Racing pair of Terence Marsh and Bux Carolyn were battling with a car that had gone into limp mode and had dropped a couple of places. Chasing after them were Glenn Gibson and Rolf Francis, who were running strongly in the Gibson Racing bat in Class P. Also moving up were Archie Rutherford and Craig Doubtfire, who picked up a place when a regional competitor kindly moved out of the way for the Regent Racing team.
Out in an aging Sandmaster, local pair James Watson and Brian Berkeljohn had dropped more than 8 minutes behind the Class B leaders, but the car was still sounding good. Sandmasters were state-of-the-art in their time, but you need to be a little long in the tooth to remember their glory days. There did look to be glory days ahead, though, for teenager Lance Woolridge, who was having another good run in the Ford Racing Ranger. After a maiden national win on the Toyota Dealer 400 in Mpumalanga, the Pietermaritzburg teenager and the experienced Ward Huxtable were chasing after a second Class E win in a row, but had Pikkie Lambeskagni and Rikus Erasmus ahead of them.
At the end of a first loop full of drama, Chris Visser and Japie Badenhorst still led the two Castrol Toyota entries, with Anthony Taylor and Robin Houghton in the pits for running repairs.
On the special vehicle front, Cully and Quinton Silwald held a slender 54-second lead over Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Rousseau, with Evan Hutchison and Achim Bergman just more than 2 minutes in arrears.
The second section of the Atlas Copco Sugarbelt 400 was run over the 93-kilometre west loop, with the course heading towards Thornville. The route then wound its way towards Richmond before doubling back to race headquarters at the Beaumont Aston Farmers Club for a compulsory 15-minute stop.
Still out in front of the field were Donaldson Prologue winners Chris Visser and Japie Badenhorst in the RFS Visser Transport Toyota Hilux. The pair had not put a wheel wrong all day, but were still under severe pressure, with Anthony Taylor and Robin Houghton losing 5 minutes in the pits at the end of the loop, once the chase had been taken up by reigning drivers champion Duncan Voss and Robbie Howie in the second Castrol Toyota Hilux. The gap was only 20 seconds, with the race far from over and a grandstand finish still a very real possibility.
There had been a changing of the guard at the head of the special vehicle field. Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Russo had managed to find a way past Cully and Quinton Silwald and were starting to consolidate their lead. The Silwalds were not yet out of the running, but had dropped 1 minute and 20 seconds behind the race leaders and needed to shift up a gear if they wanted to narrow the gap.
The unplanned pit stop at the end of Loop 1 was a hammer blow for Anthony Taylor and Robin Houghton. They were now 4 minutes behind the leaders, but would have to find a way past the special vehicle of Cully and Quinton Silwald, as well as Variawa and Rousseau, before they could think of mounting an attack on Voss and Howie. Between them, Houghton and Taylor have vast experience, with Houghton a multiple national off-road and rally champion. Taylor won his first SA Circuit racing title at the very tender age of 16, and since then has won a string of national saloon car championships and currently leads the Bridgestone Production Car Championship.
Steaming along behind the Castrol Toyota were Alfie Cox and Jürgen Schroeder in the PS Laser Nissan Navara. Cox and Schroeder were nearly 6 minutes behind Visser and Badenhorst and were doing a good job of keeping at bay the Ford Racing Ranger of Neil Woolridge and Kenny Skolthammer. The Ford pair missed the opening event of the season in the Western Cape, but then burst onto the scene with a bang via their historic win on the Toyota Dealer 400. Another strong showing on this event underlined the potential of the diesel-powered Ford Ranger TDCi, and no one would be surprised to see it pick up another win or two this season.
There had been another change near the front of the special vehicles, with KZN crew Clint Gibson and Gary Campbell moving ahead of SA champs Evan Hutchison and Achim Bergman, who were not having a good day and were battling to find any sort of rhythm in the motorized bat. Spectators found all sorts of vantage points from which to watch the action, with Mike Whitehouse and Matthew Carlson still going well in the Regent Racing Nissan Navara. Whitehouse and Carlson last year raced in the special vehicle category and surprised many people with the way in which they quickly settled into the SP class. Closing in on the Nissan pair were Hannes Grobler and Henny Terstege, who'd made up wads of ground and were now looking at a respectable haul of championship points. After their problems on the prologue, Grobler and Terstege started 12 minutes behind the first car and were 23rd on the road. Grobler won his first SA off-road title way back in the 80s, and the pair had quietly and systematically picked off slower crews. At this stage of proceedings, they were probably starting to think in terms of a top 5 finish.
A good finish was still on the cards for Lance Trethewey and Robert Horner in the LT Earthworks bet, with the local pair ahead of Christian de Plooy and Henk Janssen van Vieren. The RFS Toyota Hilux was showing a few battle scars, but the young Pretoria crew had moved ahead of Ramon and Marek Besadenhout in the Red Star Raceway Toyota. Behind the Besadenhouts, another pair of Besadenhouts, brothers Johan and Dion, had taken over leadership of Class P from Mark Corbett and Rudy Belzer in the Century Racing CR3. The West Loop combined sugarcane sections with tricky forest tracks, and it was tough going in places. Graham Leith and Mark Lawrenson were still going strong, with Terence Marsh and Bucks Carolyn starting to close in on the Transcorp Ford Ranger.
Class E was still being led by Pikkie Labuschagne and Rikus Erasmus in the 4x4 Mega World Toyota Hilux, but at times it was heavy going in the 4-cylinder vehicle. Behind the Toyota, the bat of Ken Gibson and Ralph Francis was chasing after the Class P leaders, and behind them, Marcus Taylor and Derek Keith have moved into the Class B lead in the JRE. Swaziland pair John Thompson and Clinton McNamara were still looking strong in their Zarko Magnum and had also moved up in the Class B pecking order. Another Class B crew looking to move up the ladder were John Telford and Jaco Swart in the Kalsamite bat, with their progress momentarily suspended after a brush with a very sturdy bush.
Local teams had taken command of Class B, and running in second place behind Marcus Taylor and Derek Keith were Mark Soror and Don Blakey, who were around 8 minutes in arrears. Behind them, young Lance Woolridge and Ward Huxtable were soldiering along in the Ford Racing Ranger and had plenty of ground to make up in Class E.
Back at race headquarters at the Beaumont Eston Farmers Club, there was plenty to keep VIP guests and the kids entertained, while technical crews and team followers anxiously waited for cars to arrive at the designated service point for a compulsory 15-minute stop. Chris Visser and Jaapie Badenhorst had done a terrific job all morning in the RFS Visser Transport Toyota Hilux and were indeed first to arrive at the DSP.
I must say the second loop was quite rough, especially in the forest. It's really rough. It's quite, there's lots of 90 left, 90 right, so sometimes we overshoot, reverse and wasting a little bit of time, but I must say Bucky is good and everything so far good. Just try to stay on the road.
Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Rousseau led the special vehicle category, while Castrol Toyota's Duncan Force had not given up on catching Visser and Badenhorst.
No, it's good. We've had a great morning so far. Car's well, car's great. Robbie's navigating perfectly. We just got to try and keep it all together and not, there's only one or two places where we can pass because we're in his dust the whole time. So we've got to make sure we don't make a mistake when we've got that opportunity. Otherwise, if we miss the opportunity, he'll get a gap in the dust and be dead again. So it's difficult. It's only in the forest. That's the only place where we can pass him.
Former champion Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Rousseau showed plenty of patience before moving past Cully and Quinton Solwald, with roles between the two crews now reversed completely.
Battling in the dust. The first loop we just remained behind Solwald, and second loop in the forest. We got him in the forest, waited. Eventually he made a mistake. Looked past him, and that's how we are. We'll see how the last loop is going to be. It's going to be dusty, but it's okay with the first special on the road, so we'll just try and maintain a constant consistency.
There were no major problems for the Solwalds, although a couple of errors had allowed Variawa and Rousseau to take over the lead.
It's been good. We made a couple of mistakes here on the second loop, and Shamir got past us, but otherwise it's been fine. A little bit dusty now, but it's been good.
A promising debut ended when the new diesel RFS BMW was towed into the pits after hitting a bank in the dust, and it had also been a tough old morning for Anthony Taylor and Robin Houghton in the second of the Castrol Toyotas.
Yeah, it has been. We had a brake pipe that sheared off on the suspension arm for some reason, and so we nearly went over, which is about 30 k's from the end. So I came in on the handbrake, and the guys had to change it when we stopped in between the two loops. So I lost about 5 minutes. But yeah, we're lying third now, so about 5 minutes off Duncan. I got two specials between us, so it's really going to be my battle to try and get past them. If I can, I'll probably catch up to Duncan and Chris, but at the moment I don't want to risk anything, just bring it home, try to get a good result, get the points in the bag.
Over in the Ford camp, Neil Woolridge was philosophical about the dust problem that affected everyone, but was hoping they could trace a gremlin that left the Ford Racing Ranger down on power for most of the morning.
Yeah, very dusty, but I guess it's the same for everyone. But 20 kilometers out this morning, we've lost a lot of power at the bottom end, so we're really battling in the tight, twisty stuff, having to rev the car a lot to get it to go. So hopefully we can find the problem now and fix it. But yeah, it's very difficult driving with no low down power, especially on a turbo diesel. So we're battling a little bit, but otherwise the car's fine.
Class P leaders Johan and Dion Besaidnout were having their first outing since the opening race of the season, and as far as they were concerned, it was a typical Sugarbelt outing, tough and exacting.
Ja, dis lekker droog, baie stof, vreeslik tegnies, maar die ou Sugarbelt tussen die bome, oor die berge, tussen die riviere, alles nog soos altyd. Maar is baie lekker, die kompetisie is baie taai raak.
Class E leaders Peki Labiskachny and Rickers Erasmus were also happy with their lot. The route was technical, but from a tactical approach, not much was going to change for them on the final loop.
It's very technical, but we're going fine at this stage, and we're not pushing too hard. We don't want to break the vehicle, and we think our pace is well enough to stay where we are this moment.
With a slender 54-second lead over Duncan Foss and Rob Howie, race leaders Chris Visser and Jaapie Baardnorst were again going to come under intense pressure on the final loop on what had already been an intriguing race.
On the special vehicle front, a tense final loop was also on the cards, with Cully and Quinton Sewell chasing after Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Rousseau, with the gap a tenuous 40 seconds.
It was going to be a nervous last loop for Chris Visser and Jaapie Baardnorst, but they'd done a good job of withstanding all the pressure the two Castrol Toyota Hilux entries had already thrown at them. Being first on the road had also worked to their advantage, and the onus was going to be on Duncan Foss and Rob Howie to make something happen.
It was also going to be a test of nerve for Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Rousseau at the front of the special vehicle field, but they had been this route before, and leading races was not a new experience. Behind them, Anthony Taylor and Robin Houghton had managed to get past the Sewells and were well set for a place on the production vehicle podium. Taylor and Houghton were still pushing hard, but the best they could hope for was to get past Variawa and Rousseau. For the Castrol Toyota crew, hopes of a win went out the window when a brake pipe broke towards the end of the first loop. From that moment on, they were on the back foot, and for the second year in a row, the Sugarbelt had not been kind to the Toyota crew.
As far as the Sewells were concerned, they looked to have decided to settle for a solid second and a good haul of points. For the Palabora team, it was a timely return to form and a performance that will have done their confidence the world of good.
By the same token, a solid fourth place behind the leading trio of Toyotas was also a good result for former champions Neil Woolridge and Kenny Skolthammer in the Ford Racing Ranger. Back-to-back wins don't come easy, and the Sugarbelt is never an easy event. For all that, there was more evidence that the turbo-diesel Ford Ranger has race-winning potential. Behind the Ford, the SP Laser Nissan Navara pair of Alfie Cox and Jürgen Schroeder probably exceeded expectations and along the way had a lot of fun. Behind them, Evan Hutchison and Achim Bergman probably did not have as much fun, but third place did their special vehicle championship hopes no harm.
For his legion of fans, the drive of the day came from Hannes Grobler in the RFS Toyota Hilux. Grobler and Henny Terstegen started 11th in the production vehicle category and, believe it or not, 23rd on the road. And at the death, moved past Mike Whitehouse and Matthew Carlson in the Regent Racing Nissan Navara to finish 6th overall in the production vehicle category. For their part, Whitehouse and Carlson continued their remarkable reliability record.
Locals Lance Trethewey and Robert Horner will have been delighted with their 4th overall in the special vehicle category, with the pair hardly putting a wheel wrong throughout the 2 days. Much the same applies to Christian de Ploy Jr. and Henk Janssen van Vieren, who came up with another workmanlike performance in the second of the RFS Toyota Hiluxes.
Some people had a bird's eye view of proceedings, with Cape brothers Johan and Dion Besaidnout putting the finishing touches to winning Class P. The Edenko back pair also grabbed a top 5 finish in a result that resurrected their championship hopes. Ramon and Maret Besaidnout finished their race with the Red Star Raceway Toyota reduced to 2-wheel drive, while Mark Corbett and Rudy Balzar picked up a welcome finish despite shock absorber problems on the Senshi Racing CR3.
There was also a welcome finish for former South African special vehicle champion Terence Marsh and multiple SA champion Bux Carolyn in the second of the Regent Racing Nissan Navaras. They showed plenty of character on a day fraught with problems.
The Donaldson prologue was fraught with problems for Free State pair George Barkhuizen and David van Wyk. They rolled the AIM Toyota Hilux when they hit a bank, and after starting at the back of the field, came up with a gutsy display to make it to the finish line. Off-road racing is littered with drivers and co-drivers who've excelled at other sports, but Barkhuizen has the somewhat unusual distinction of having played underwater hockey for the Free State. Did someone really say underwater hockey in the Free State?
While TV cameramen love an opportunity to demonstrate their creative skills, Graham Leith and Mark Lawrenson must have been delighted with the solid first outing of the season in the Transcorp Ford Ranger. The pair had a trouble-free run that augurs well for the rest of the year, and John Telford and Jaco Swartz were in the same boat. A steady performance gave them their best result of the season, with the pair on the Class P podium.
After running into problems on the prologue, there was also a come-from-behind performance from veterans Richard Schilling and Chris Davies, who started last in Class P and worked their way right up to fourth. Another Free State crew, Lodebrain and Rian Greyling and the Roerkon Ford Ranger, also showed plenty of character after prologue woes of their own.
There were also prologue woes for Nick and Ryan Harper, who salvaged some pride for the Atlas Copco team by fighting back to finish 9th overall and 5th in Class A. It was a fight back that rescued important championship points for the father and son team, and behind them Pikkie Labuskaghni and Rikus Erasmus brought home the 4x4 Mega World Hilux, now reduced to two-wheel drive, to take the Class E victory. There was another come from the back of the field finish for Jimmy Zahos and Stefan Kutsia in the Cobalt Racing Porter, with Lance Woolridge and Ward Huxtable second in Class E in the Ford Racing Ranger. Bringing up the rear of the field, reigning champions Sugarbelt from Breda and Johan de Toy gave the new Northam Toyota Hilux a win first time out and clinched the Class D victory.
Back at race headquarters, the checkered flag was out for Chris Visser and Japie Badenhorst, who repelled all attacks from the two factory Castrol Toyota Hilux entries to score a memorable win. Duncan Foss and Rob Howie were second, with Visser and Badenhorst taking their second victory of the season.
There was also a second victory in the special vehicle category for Shamir Variawa and Siegfried Russo in the Total Motorsport Porter, while on the production car podium the champagne was starting to flow. It was a magnificent effort from Visser and Badenhorst and a perfect weekend for the pair.
Yeah, I must say it's really testing for the bakkie and for man and machine. And when we started this morning, Anthony was a second behind us, and yes, he was pushing us for about 30 kilometers, and then we made a small dust gap on him. But from there on, we just tried to keep it cool and stay on the road, and that's what we did the whole day.
After 400 Ks, the winning margin was a mere 66 seconds, with Toyota filling the first three places, with the top 10 all coming from the Premier SP class.
There was no spraying champagne for Shamir Variawa, who for religious reasons does not touch alcohol.
Yeah, it's great. We had a great day today. Considering last event we didn't finish, so we thought, it will actually hamper the championship points. We came out today and we started second, and eventually we got into the lead and we stayed there. And just it's actually good for our points. We're now leading, and the rest of the season now we'll just try and get a podium finish. We won't try and push for wins or anything, just get a podium finish.
The final gap in the special vehicle category was just 91 seconds, and behind the first four Class A cars there was another strong showing from the Class P brigade.
The ABSA Off-Road Championship now takes a lengthy break to accommodate the FIFA Soccer World Cup, and the next event will be the Sun City 400 on July the 16th and 17th.